as we are working through this process of awakening, is we have these moments where we are longing for something different. And we want things to be different. And then we have these wonderful experiences where we recognize, oh, this is it. This is beautiful. So the miracle is really going from one way of seeing to another. And even in the sharing of what some people had shared some of the miracles, it's the same thing. It goes from one way of seeing or perceiving to the other. So that's really what A Course in Miracles is all about. It's really about shifting perception. Its end goal or its aim is really to come into an experience of what we truly are and who we are, which lies well beyond the idea or the experience and feeling of separation. And when we feel separate, or we think of ourselves as these separate entities, inherent in that belief will be this longing for something else. And so for me, in my experience, it has been the application of Course principles that have seemingly opened the mind up to an experience of love and an experience of unity. And so today I hope to share a little bit, particularly on relationships. A Course in Miracles is a very thick book, well over 1,000 pages, but much of that book is dedicated to relationships. So I thought it would be interesting to just kind of share a little bit about relationships and how relationships really serve one of two purposes. They either serve to maintain this sense of separation where there's a me and there's a you, or they serve to show us where in the mind there's still a block to love. What the Course is offering is an opportunity to examine our relationships, all of them. And the Course would teach that from within the insanity, you can't evaluate the insanity. You have to step back. It's only from withdrawing for a moment and looking at it. So when we talk about relationships, or we talk about the Course's use of using relationships as a means of awakening, it's really calling us to step back for a moment and question our assumptions and beliefs about the relationships that we have. And typically the best time to do that is when we are upset and charged. Because that's where we lose ourselves, that's where we forget. I'm going to refer to the quote that was actually shared this morning, which says, "In reality, you are perfectly unaffected by all expressions of lack of love." In reality, you are perfectly unaffected. So guess what? If I'm affected by traffic, then I'm not in reality. If I'm affected by my partner's behavior, if I'm affected, then I'm not in reality. If I'm affected by the way someone says something to me, if I'm affected by what other people do, if I'm affected by the news, if I'm affected by my work environment, if I'm affected by my boss, my employees, if I'm affected in any way that is not consistent with love, then I'm not in reality. Mm-hmm. And so those moments will be used to prove to you, or to prove to us, that we are separate. And so we go into our narrative and we believe in that separate experience and that separate story, which, as I was saying before, serves to define me. I'm guilty for smoking. I'm upset at my boss. I'm playing out this narrative for which is antithetical to reality. And so when that happens in our experience, what the Course would offer us is the opportunity to look into the mind of where we are holding back. Course in Miracles says that which is missing is what's not being extended. So in a moment where I think, I'm feeling so lonely, I'm not reaching out. In a moment where I feel they don't understand me, I'm not extending understanding. So this is really a practice of what I come to share or open and invite us all to do as we are in relationship with others, is to look at the way we're using the relationship. Does the relationship or the situation, is it being used to cause some sense of suffering, or is it being used to make me aware of where I still have a belief there, still being caught by something that's diverting me or obscuring the reality of who and what we am, who and what I am. These can be from yourself and others, from yourself to others, from others to you. Peace is an attribute in you. You cannot find it outside, which in many relationships, especially in my experience, I know there have been many times where my objective was, well, I will be happy when I teach this person how to do this. Or I will be happy when, they live up to what my expectations are. In my current relationship, it's so funny, my partner Mike, who I've been with for 10 years, when he and I started dating, I remember in the beginning, he would never call. I would always be the one to call. I couldn't figure it out. Like, why is he not calling? Even worse, the first time I said, I love you, it was crickets. Nothing. No sound. What? Doesn't make sense, because it didn't conform really to the world's view of what relationships are. And really because at the time, unconsciously, there was a desire to be defined by the relationship and find love in or from the other person, which we know we can never find. Intellectually, at least, we know we can never really find love, peace, and happiness from anything outside. But in this relationship, at the time, it was very torturing, because I really had the strong desire to want to be with this person, yet it didn't conform to the way I thought the relationship should actually work. And so I didn't get the I love yous, I didn't get the phone calls, and there were a whole lot of other things that I can go into. But what was there was, when we were together, it was great, it was fine. There was a sense of peace and acceptance, joy when we did things together. I mean, in the present moment, there was never anything wrong. So at that point in time, having had A Course in Miracles in my experience, my desire was to use, every time I would get upset, every time I thought, well, how come you didn't call? Let me step back from the insanity and look at this. Really what the Holy Spirit is what the Course would say, which is another way of just saying pausing and not getting caught up in the narrative. And what I come to realize really is that there was a sense of validation that was being sought from the phone call. And with the I love you too, there was a sense of a validation of needing the love. But what this is aiming, and in the moment, it's not always known. And so the opportunity is to call for the miracle, really ask for the miracle, and look within with the Holy Spirit. Say, I'm seeing this wrongly. I'm at the effect, and I'm not in reality. Help me see this differently. And what eventually would happen with everything that the principles of A Course in Miracles, the application of the principles were applied to, is eventually it would always bring me back to this. Which is, and some of you may be thinking, well, what is this? Well, there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong. And so relationships will highlight, as I showed you or shared with you in my experience, highlight where we think there is something wrong. This person's not doing it the way I want them. That person is doing it, or that person did something against me. You get all these things going, and underneath that is really an attempt by a separate self that believes itself to be separate, an attempt to manipulate and conform the world to its wishes. And that is always going to keep us bound to a sense of suffering. And so really what this talk is about is an invitation to look at our relationships and recognize that they offer us an opportunity to recognize where in our mind we are still holding on to this need to manipulate the world or manipulate things in our world. We don't have to, because we are being extensions of Source. We already have everything. Being extensions of grace, we already are everything. Course in Miracles says there is no difference between being and having. In other words, simply by being what you are, you have everything. And its central kind of theme is this theme of forgiveness, which is the willingness to overlook or step back from what's unfolding and joining in with the Holy Spirit, which is really withdrawing from the narrative. So if the narrative is the ego, then the Holy Spirit, we can say, is what witnesses all. And I can confidently say, without question in my mind, that right here in this moment, there is a definitionless awareness or an experience that seems to be or live somewhere behind the eyes, something within. That is the Holy Spirit. That is awareness. And we can come up with a lot of words and names, and certainly in a church where everything is open, I'm sure many names have been used, but it's that simple. Grace is in charge of everything else. And so that therein lies really the portal, and therein lies really the central teachings of all these, what really are non-dual teachings, even though there's a lot of duality in A Course in Miracles. But the duality is simply the use of symbols and words to bring us back to right here.